Welcome, my friends, to our series on Mercury in the 12 houses of the horoscope. I'm just so glad that you've joined me for this series. This information is coming to you from my Royal Stars Academy course in astrology, and you can learn astrology there with me at any time you like, or if you prefer, you can do one of my short courses at the Learn Astrology page of my website. And now, without any further ado, let's look straight at Mercury. We know that Mercury is the planet considered to be closest to the sun. But did you know that in the 1800s, it was believed that there was another planet, Vulcan, that existed between Mercury and the sun? However, it was considered too close to the sun to be observable in the sun's glare. In fact, in esoteric astrology, the hypothetical Vulcan is still included in astrological analysis, and it's an absolutely fascinating point in the sky. So my point being here is that there are some people who consider that Mercury is not the closest planet to the sun. But in this series, we'll be looking at current astronomical concepts. And that means Mercury is the messenger of the gods, considered to be the closest to the sun, our main luminary in the sky. Let's look at the astronomy of Mercury. Mercury is the smallest planet in the solar system. As we've just established, it's also the closest planet to the sun. But even though it is near to the sun, it is not the hottest planet. Would you believe that because Mercury has no atmosphere at all, it has the most variable temperatures of any planet because it cannot retain any heat from the sun? You know, nighttime temperatures on Mercury can get as cold as minus 173 degrees Celsius, or that's minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit. While in the daytime, Mercury is hotter than your oven. It gets to a stinking 427 degrees Celsius. That's 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Amazing. What a variance. Now, Mercury also takes 87 Earth days to orbit the sun. Earth only takes 365. So it's a very fast little planet. It spins around the sun really, really quickly. Mercury is made of rocks covered in crater holes, just like the moon is. And this tells us that it's been hit many times in the past by comets and meteors. They slammed into little Mercury very hard, as once again, Mercury has no atmosphere to buffer them or slow the comets down. So the impact was very visible, or is very visible, on Mercury's surface. Billions of years ago, Mercury was also volcanically active, and this has also made its splotchy surface full of volcanoes and vents and craters as well. Let's look at the mythology of Mercury. You know, people have known that Mercury as a body in the sky has existed since as long ago as 1400 years BC. You know, in ancient Babylon, they called Mercury Nabu. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Nabu. And Nabu was the god in charge of writing, thinking, and wisdom. He would write down on a tablet the fated destiny of each person. Nabu wore a cap with horns and rode on a winged dragon named Sirush. Now, it was the Romans who worshipped the god that was named Mercury, and he was the god connected to business and making money, communicating and giving messages. He was also associated with traveling and was a guide for souls going to the underworld. There's a lot of mythology about Mercury knowing what's going on in the underworld because he was the god that traversed the pathway to the underworld. He had a special temple built for him in 495 BC and a celebration on the 15th of May called Mercurialia. In ancient Greece, Mercury was known as Hermes, the youngest of all the Greek gods. Hermes liked to trick people. He was a bit of a prankster and a fun lover, a lot like Loki in the Norse mythology. He also wore winged shoes and a winged hat. He had a rooster for a pet and was referred to as the messenger of the gods. The Egyptians also worshipped a god who was named Thoth, and just like Mercury and Hermes, he was the god of wisdom and writing and science and magic and art. He was also the god of judgment and the dead. Thoth had the body of a human with the head of an ibis bird. He was the secretary and counselor to the Egyptian sun god Ra, a record keeper this time, not just a messenger of the gods. Now, what about the astrology of Mercury? In astrology, Mercury tells us about how we learn, what we tend to think about, how we will tend to speak and communicate. Mercury also represents business and trade, brothers and sisters, and is also the planet of being young and playful. Where Mercury sits in our astrology chart, the map of the sky at the moment we were born, will tell us so much about how we're going to be playful, how we will think, how we will speak, and how we're going to learn best in life. Now, your Mercury might say that you will learn best through being around other people. Or maybe your Mercury position might say that you will learn best through being very quiet and reading a lot. Or maybe by experimenting and doing things that are very out of the ordinary. There are so many ways we can learn, and Mercury shows us how we can best do that. In astrology, Mercury is also a very talented planet. It tells us about our skills and our abilities. If Mercury is in Virgo, for example, it might tell us that we might find that we're very good at cooking. If Mercury is in the sign of Cancer, we might have an amazing imagination and create fascinating stories. Perhaps our Mercury is in the sign of Gemini, and that might make us a very funny person indeed. Wherever Mercury sits can also show us what our brothers and our sisters might be like. For example, if Mercury is in the zodiac sign of Aries, our siblings might be very competitive and like to play games. Or in the sign of Aquarius, our brothers and sisters might be very quirky and unusual and super smart. Mercury is a planet that is in charge of two star signs known as Gemini and Virgo. These two signs are all about being very clever and practical with your hands or practical with your mind or both. Mercury in astrology is also the playful jester, a jokester. He is clever and bright. He is a young person, a youthful energy, and all of us have a little bit of Mercury in our heart somewhere. Everyone is different in the way they learn, think, talk, and play. And Mercury teaches us to love the different ways people think and communicate, and to love our own unique way of thinking and talking and communicating as well. In what ways are you talented? How do you learn best? What things do you think about the most? This is all reflective of your Mercury placement. Your Mercury placement gives the reason for the answers you just gave to those questions I asked you, and so much more. And now, without any further ado, we're going to look at what Mercury brings to us or gives to our lives through his placement in each of the houses of the horoscope. So join with me now. We're going to dive into a little piece from the Royal Stars Academy that describes Mercury in all the different houses.
Mercury in the 8th house. This is where you have skills, okay? Big skills. You want to read about it, study about it, investigate it, and because you're into doing that, you will develop a great level of skillfulness, Mercury in the 8th house. This energy of wanting to read about it, study about it, investigate it, will be directed into science, the occult, revealing hidden mysteries of the universe, all those 8th house type things. Mercury rules business and business transactions, so with this placement you might be conducting a lot of private business transactions. This is a private house, or business and trade dealings that have a very hidden nature. It's also an indicator, Mercury here, of somebody who does business with other people's money. So this could also indicate being a writer or a speaker who handles confidential information, talks about secrets. It's an excellent position for a psychologist because you're listening to other people's secrets. A sexologist would be good because you're actually, this is a house of sex and you're listening to other people's sexual hang-ups and sexual problems too. So somebody who keeps their secrets. Astrologers who can see the past and future and then speak about these things are often seen with Mercury here as well. It's great for tax attorneys or somebody who works with hedge funds and confidential information. Somebody who works perhaps as a criminologist or as an administrator, Mercury, in an emergency department in a hospital, or an administrator at some kind of a, like emergency clinic of some description. Usually a Mercury in the 8th house person will like to read about 8th house things. Conspiracy theories, criminology, dark secrets, serial killers, all that sort of stuff. You'll like to do deep research about such topics as well. No talking about the weather. You don't want to be sort of superficial and on the surface. Your conversation, you'll want it to be very substantial, a lot of substance. It's almost like you want to go deep into the more offensive and painful topics of life to understand them and research those things. Looking into bullying, abuse, violence can be something that you might be curious about. Again, great for psychological researchers to have a position like this if they're doing, research into bullying behaviors in children and that kind of stuff. Now, in your communications and writings, you might shock other people. The 8th house is a shocking house. It's a house of suddenness or things that are taboo and that shock us. And so you might write or communicate in a way that shocks other people. I'm thinking about in Australia, we had some advertisements by the Traffic Authority that I don't know if they still run on television because I don't watch mainstream media anymore. But when I was a teenager, we had what were known as TAC, Traffic Authority Commission or something, adverts that were very much shock value, and Mercury is advertising. I'd like to see a chart for the TAC actually. I'm sure they've got Mercury in the 8th house, or at least their marketing executive probably did. They would show pictures of horrific accidents and people whose bodies were severely damaged, and they would use these kinds of images to shock you into action. For example, making you wear your seatbelt, or cigarette package warnings. Advertising, smoking harms your health, with a big eyeball on it looking all horrible, or a lung that's been corrupted by cigarette smoking or something. Those sorts of things are very Mercury in the 8th house advertising. So if you are looking at going into advertising or you work in the advertising industry, it would be very interesting if you had this position to note if you like to use shock tactics. 8th house Mercury really has the mind of a detective. They need to investigate and find out everything. There's no sort of pulling the wool over people's eyes who have this placement, no bullshitting them. They have a very deep mind. They have a liking for talking about taboo topics, deep, intense subjects, and they want to know. Tell me why. I want to understand. They want the knowledge. Be careful if this Mercury has bad aspects here, as it can indicate some sort of harm coming to you from your siblings, your co-workers and teammates, okay? So be aware of that. And you'd be looking for maybe 4 or more hard aspects to a Mercury in this placement. There is a capacity to communicate with the hidden worlds, to sort of interact with secret energy, and also even sometimes an ability to communicate with people who've crossed over, like past life regressionists do well, with this, because, they're communicating with those past lives sometimes, but often past life regressionists can communicate with deceased loved ones as well. Certainly Dolores Cannon was doing that. She was talking to other beings in other realms through her regression work. At the time of death, which we see through the 8th house, you might find that you're surrounded by many people. Remember, Mercury is social here in the 8th house of death. Or you might pass over from having lung issues of some nature. That's if Mercury is particularly debilitated or has heavy aspects to it. You could pass away while traveling, or pass away by, while you're sending a message to someone, on the phone with someone perhaps. that sort of thing. So yeah, you can also, Mercury is quite a fast energy, so one of the good things about this placement is that you might pass away swiftly. No dilly-dallying and hanging around for years and years on your sick deathbed. It's more swift, which is good news. Nobody wants to hang around waiting to die.